Story this hour. The National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA, will today announce if it will appeal against last month's judgment in the so-called spy tape saga or to reinstate charges against President Jacob Zuma. The High Court in Pretoria last month ordered the NPA to review its April 2009 decision to drop the 783 corruption charges against the president. The court found that the then acting NPA head, Mokotedi Mshe, had acted irrationally after listening to intercepted cell phone conversations between the former NPA head, Bulelani Ngcuka, and the ex-Scorpions head, Leonard McCarthy, discussing the charges. For the latest on this story, we now cross to our SABC reporter, Aldrin Sampier in Pretoria. Aldrin, you're there this morning. Can you give us a brief background as to what this case involved in the so-called spy tapes?
Well, good morning, Elvis. You'd remember that the so-called spy tapes back in 2007, just before the Polokwane conference, there was a conversation that then Scorpions boss, Leonard McCarthy, as well as NPA boss, Bulelani Ngcuka, were having around when to reinstate the charges against President Jacob Zuma. Those were the corruption charges against President Jacob Zuma. The argument was, do you do it before the Polokwane conference or do you do it after the Polokwane conference? And this was, of course, to influence the outcome of that conference. Remember that it was President Jacob Zuma head-to-head with Thabo Mbeki as well, who were vying for their top position to become ANC president, and eventually President Jacob Zuma becoming the president of the ANC. Well, when the NPA later decided to charge President Jacob Zuma back in 2007, President Jacob Zuma then made representation, and his legal team furnished the NPA with some conversations, this so-called spy tapes, the conversation between Leonard McCarthy as well as Bulelani Ngcuka, and said that that amount to political interference and he will not be receiving a fair trial. Later on, 2009, then acting NPA boss Mokotedi Mshe then decided to drop the charges, even though in his own words, they had stated that the prosecutors that they have a strong case against the president, irrespective of the conversation that had taken place. But remember that in that court judgment last month by Judge Lidwaba, where indicated that the acting prosecution boss at the time, Mokotedi Mshe, was too angry, and the decision that he's taken was irrational.
What are the chances of the National Prosecuting Authority announcing that it will appeal the High Court's decision this morning, or perhaps that they will review the decision to drop the charges against President Jacob Zuma?
Well, speaking to some other people and reading some of the analysis throughout the case as well, is that all indications are that probably the NPA would say, listen, we're deciding that we will appeal the ruling by the High Court. And of course, the argument that they can put in there is the argument around the separation of power. But remember that when the DA took the matter to the High Court, they argued at the High Court that they want the decision to be reviewed, although eventually they want the charges to be reinstated, because they believe that the president should have his day in court. They then decided at the High Court to rather ask for the matter to be reviewed, because they didn't want to argue around the issue around the separation of power. However, this decision by Lidwaba, some might argue that it is a case of separation of power, literally telling the NPA that, listen, you need to review the decision that you took at the time because it was irrational. And as indicated as well in the transcripts, where Mokotedi Mshe said at the time that they had a strong case against the president. So it didn't make sense just before the elections as well, back in 2009, to drop these charges. Some have said that that was a political, but that was not the argument that came through the court when the court heard that matter.
What time is the court supposed to resume this morning?
Well, actually, it's not the court case, but rather it is the NPA boss, Sean Abrams, who will make that announcement, whether they will be reinstating those charges or whether they will prosecute the president and reinstate those charges, or rather ignore the ruling by the High Court and not go ahead with this case. Because remember that Mokotedi Mshe, they've always argued that politicians have always argued that justice delayed is justice denied. or whether they will go to the Supreme Court of Appeal. And that decision will be taken around about 10 a.m. this morning. And of course, we will be bringing you that decision live.
Thank you so much, Aldrin St. Pierre. He's live at the NPA headquarters there, and they will announce whether or not that case will go ahead, whether they will appeal, or whether or not that charges will be reinstated against the president. We'll keep you updated, and as he says, we'll go there live a little bit later. Stay tuned.